In this special episode of The Fries, we talk with one of the trustees of FindingFive, a tech nonprofit that allows researchers to do their research online. This is a sponsored episode, but I actually learned some things about how to do online research, and you might find it interesting too. If you've ever wanted to be a participant in social science research, you might also find this worthwhile. And Megan and Noah are longtime friends, which you can definitely tell from listening. Hope you enjoy.
So today we are here with Dr. Noah Nelson, who graduated from the same program that I did. We were cohort mates. I'm so excited to see your face again. We spent a lot of time talking the last couple of weeks, and we haven't talked in a bit.
I know. Yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
And we're here to talk about FindingFive, which you're going to tell us all about.
Yeah, what is FindingFive?
Yeah, I guess we should just open the floodgates with that, right? So I'm a volunteer with FindingFive. I'm on the board of trustees, so full disclosure here.
Right.
I have some biased opinions. But FindingFive is a platform that's it's an online platform that's meant to make it easier for researchers to do online research and just kind of reduce those technological barriers that a lot of people face in trying to do their research outside of a physical laboratory.
So what kinds of barriers can there be?
Well, the biggest barrier, I think, is if you're going to do a study online, you have to have servers. So you can rent them. I mean, it doesn't have to be a technological barrier. You can rent them from Amazon or Google, but they charge an arm and a leg, right? But you can also host a server yourself, but that's where it becomes a tech barrier, right? Because that takes know-how that isn't really the forte of a researcher who's just trying to learn something about how humans think and behave in the world, right? So one of the things we do is we have servers that we host and maintain and do all the maintenance on and make sure that they're powerful enough to run your studies for you. And you just have to design the study with us. That's it.
This is so beyond me. So having a server, what do you mean? Just what does that mean to have a server to be able to run a study over the internet?
See, exactly. Yeah. Why should you ever have to worry about
that
unless it's your thing?
Right.
So, I mean, really a server is just a glorified computer. It's a computer that allows communication over the web, right? And you can set up your own computer to be a server if you want to. It's a doable thing. But generally, when we talk about servers, we're talking about warehouses of computers that are specifically for this purpose. So I don't know, if you have a Google Drive or something, right? They just have warehouses of servers that are just places where that data is stored that are just constantly sending and receiving signals to say, does anybody need my data? Here it is. Do you have permission to view the data? Do you not have permission? Right. And that's pretty much all that servers are and what they're doing. But, they have to be maintained. They have to be monitored. They have to be encrypted if you have sensitive data on them. And all of that stuff can be tough for somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. So we handle that for you.
Oh, so when you say something's on the cloud, it's actually on a server somewhere?
That's right.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
It doesn't actually live in a cloud. It lives on the ground somewhere. Yeah, on a server. Exactly. Although it would be fanciful if that were true.
It would. Technically, FindingFive is a tech nonprofit. What does it mean to be a tech nonprofit? So nonprofit seems self-explanatory, but sometimes it really isn't.
Yeah. Well, in our case, we're registered with the IRS as, our classification is 501c3, which I think is it's a nonprofit classification where you register with the IRS as a nonprofit. In this case, it's for charitable, scientific, or educational purposes is what 501c3 is. That's where we fit in. And really what it means is that since we're a nonprofit rather than a for-profit company, we don't have any shareholders or stakeholders to answer to. Pretty much we're just a team of weekend warriors trying to keep this thing going to make the lives of researchers easier, more efficient, better. Until recently, we were kind of just operating out of our own pockets. But I think we're at the point now where we're affording to keep the lights on without having to pay for anything ourselves, which is really great. And we're hoping to continue to expand and grow and improve what we can do. Yeah, I don't know that there's much more to it in at least the nonprofit side than, since we don't really answer to anyone that we don't want to, we just answer to the researchers who use our platform. So they tend to ask us for features and developments to make their studies run better, and we try to oblige them. And now at this point, we're expanding into, having more actual participants use our platform directly. In the past, our participants were recruited through other means, and it was really just the researchers we interacted with. But now that we're starting to interact with participants more, we also want to make sure we're answering to them and make sure that their experience is positive, right? That they're paid fairly for their time, that kind of stuff. So, that's the nonprofit side. And the tech side is really just that it's software that we're providing, right? Software and the servers that we're paying for to maintain the product.
Can you give us an example of a kind of study that would be done on FindingFive?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of different things that you can do at this point. We've allowed the actual research that people have wanted to do drive the sorts of features we've developed. Early days, the kinds of things that FindingFive was really built for, and this is something that we still excel at, is anything that's a basic stimulus presentation kind of thing. So what this means is, like, you get studies that are often survey-based. So it might be, here's a question, provide your answer. There are a bunch of platforms out there that can allow you to do that as a researcher, some more cheaply than others. Most universities and other institutions like that probably have some kind of subscription plan with such a service that allows the researchers there to use it. So we haven't really focused on that kind of thing, although it's definitely doable on our platform. And we focused instead on things like naming tasks is a common thing. So you would say, present a picture, and the participant in the study would be asked to, provide a name or a label for that image that they're seeing. And these kinds of studies, sometimes they really, they often care a lot about how long it takes someone to respond, not just what their response is. So one of the things that's often manipulated by researchers in these kinds of studies is, like, I'm a linguist, for example. Megan and I are linguists, right? Well, actually, all three of us are.
Yeah.
So, I'll speak to what we know, which is, words, right? So you could present someone with a word and you'd be interested in how long it takes them to, let's say, identify whether or not it's actually a word of their language, right? So, like, one of the things that we know is really well established in linguistics is that, if I present you with a real word, you'll say, yeah, that's a real word, faster than you would be able to say, no, that's not a word, to something that's not in your language, right? Likewise, if I give you two things that are not a word, but one of them really could be, you're going to take longer to say no, because there's that part of your brain saying, is this a word? Did I just forget that this is a word? Right? And that's going to make you take longer. And so that kind of data is really valuable in, cognitive and behavioral sciences. And that's the kind of thing that FindingFive really excels at. Present a stimulus, measure the reaction time. The amount of time it takes for someone to respond, that's reaction time.
So are you able to collect audio?
Yes. So absolutely. Yeah. So we can, so that was sort of where we started, and we've expanded a lot. So one thing we can do is audio recording. So you can say, you can present, say, prompts to participants, for example, and then have them record themselves depending on the way you want your study to flow. Maybe you want them to have time to practice it and give their perfect response, and you let them re-record it as many times as they want to. Or maybe you just want them to, record for a short window, and if they don't get their answer in there, they're out of luck. They just missed that one, right? So we allow for all these different kinds of manipulations that involve recording audio. We also have a pretty new feature where they could, for example, take a picture of themselves if that's something that they need to do for the study. We have mouse tracking, so you can set up a study to track the participants' mouse movements, so that maybe you want them to, see 4 images on the screen, and then they hear a sound and they have to pick which image corresponds to that sound, and you can track where their mouse goes before they click. That is another thing we can do.
So you can do now, someone taking a picture of themselves. Are you working towards video? Because I'm thinking of like sign language studies.
Yes. So that would be something that we want to do. As I said, we're primarily geared towards what are the people already using our platform asking for. And I've been a little bit out of the loop on the researcher interaction side the last couple months, but as far as I'm aware, nobody's asking for that right now. But we have it as kind of a plan to develop. It's just one of those things where it's like, we're going to prioritize what the person who's already using our platform wants to do tomorrow, rather than what we imagine people might find useful down the road. So, but that is something we've talked about. It's something that's on our list. And actually, one thing that we've talked about, but we haven't really implemented right now is instead of just mouse tracking, doing actual eye tracking. But it's very tricky with our kind of platform. The participants, when you go into a lab, you can get set up with like a very specific eye tracking system. There are eye tracking, there's eye tracking software out there that you can use from, say, like a laptop webcam, but it's not very good, right? And we've generally tried to steer clear of anything that gives you suboptimal data. So when we've decided to implement something, it's because we are confident that the data you're going to get is publication worthy data. And, we're not quite there with the eye tracking yet, but it's something we keep monitoring, right? How are the cameras getting better? How is the face recognition software getting better to identify fine movements of the eye and get a better sense of where they might be looking in the camera? That kind of stuff. But these are all things we're always thinking about for the future.
You said that you're thinking about how you interact with participants now too. And as a participant, I'm imagining myself as one. I just thought of a question as you said that. What are you doing with the facial recognition stuff, the data that you collect from me?
Oh yeah, no, that's an awesome question, right? And an important one. So for the picture thing, right, that counts as personally identifiable information. If you're taking part in a study that's asking you to take a picture of yourself, that's definitely personally identifiable, right? No, we don't do any processing or facial recognition stuff at all ourselves, right? But it may be that the researcher's research agenda involves something along those lines. So the kind of thing that we do is we say, look, if this is the sort of study you want to make, one of the things that we're actually working on right now is setting up a process for ensuring that information of how, what you're going to be asked to do and how that data could be used by the researcher is accurately, relayed to you as a participant, right? So in a lot of cases, we rely on the researchers for this kind of thing because we already have institutional review boards and other mechanisms and systems that are in place to make sure that people are doing responsible research when they do this stuff. And, so right now, all that we do is say, like, did a review board approve your research, right? Is it okay? And then if there are certain features are being used, such as audio recording or, picture recording or anything like that, you're told this may be part of the study. Please don't forget that you can leave the study at any time if you're not comfortable with it, right? Which is always the case in this kind of research. So right now, that's what we do because we don't process any of the data. We just give it to the researchers. But the other side of things that's not specific to personally identifiable information, but is just a more general thing that we do is everything's encrypted and anonymized. So the researcher doesn't know who you are. They get a randomly generated ID that happens to correspond to your data. And it's severed from your name and your other identifiable information. Now, we need to have that information. So when we take participants in to participate in studies, we do, ask them to set up a profile with various information. But that data is kept entirely separate from their participation ID so that, there's really no way for anyone to say this data belongs to that person, other than, as you pointed out, when you do have personally identifiable information that's being collected, someone who really wants to could find a way to try to leverage some, facial recognition software to find out who you are. And that's just something that as a participant, you have to gauge. Like, am I comfortable with that risk? Knowing that really, the researchers don't really have that agenda, I don't think.
If you have a profile, basically it's just like, here's a study they participated in, but not the data. Or do you not even track that?
We track it internally and sort of behind the scenes, like where if we want to pull that information up, we can do so. And the reason we do that is because we make it possible for a researcher to say, for example, set up a multiple studies in a row where it might be, this is, study part 1. This is study part 2. You have to complete part 1 before you can do part 2. So we will track. And in that case, what it is it's just tied to that participant ID that's not associated with your name or your email or any of that information. But we also do keep records that make it possible so that if a researcher needs to, and they set up the study to make this possible and the participant agreed to it, all of these criteria have to be met for this to happen, then we can provide them with emails for participants in order to say, I don't know, deal with an issue if there's like a dispute about payment or something like that. We have some of that information that we hold on to for a limited period of time to make sure that those kinds of things can go on. But yeah, I mean, with any kind of data like this, I mean, in my experience, outside of online research, right, anything that you can do as a researcher to keep the identities of your participants secret from yourself, let alone anyone else, you want to do, because you're really just running the risk of, corrupting and biasing your own data if you know too much about who's providing it, right? And researchers aren't really in it to learn about an individual person. I mean, in any research I've done, I've never cared what an individual person is thinking or doing. I care about trends and patterns that people share, right? And so knowing who it is that gave me this data point or that data point doesn't really help me learn that. From
research standpoint, over the last couple of years, because of COVID, it's been very relevant to do studies over the internet for me, for a lot of people. Well, and the baby studies, although I could see how you could use like this on school age kids with keeping the mouse tracking. So like I'm seeing uses of this even like getting pretty young too, or maybe like the parent will help the infant, or I don't know how that's going to work, but are you working with anyone who is interested in infants and how that's how they could use it for infants?
I know that we have some researchers who are interested in doing research with school age children. I know that, but I don't think they're doing it yet, right? They're interested in it, but there's a very legitimate kind of concern with this sort of stuff when it comes to anyone who's under age, I think it's age 13, because you have certain laws about the collection and storage of data where, there are products and services that are, online technical products and services that technically no one under the age of 13 is supposed to use without, explicit oversight from a guardian. So that's the kind of thing that it does complicate it, but I don't think these are impossible barriers to overcome. We just have only actually just now, as we've started to kind of expand the participant side of what we're doing, really begun to grapple with these issues. So we have some researchers who are wanting to talk about these things with us, but I think their targets are not infants. They're older than that. I definitely see it as a possibility. It's something that could be done. But I mean, as you know, working with infants can be a finicky data collection process. So I mean, I would expect a bit more attrition in your data than you would want. Like you're going to have some data you're going to have to throw out. If you're trying to do it, online remotely with infants where the parent has to, or whoever, whatever guardian has to be the, and where you would normally do that, but you'd be able to, be in the lab and say, hey, can you like do this? Or, can you please stop looking at the light and distracting the baby? You can't do that really in this online data collection kind of process. So you'd have to just present instructions to the guardian and trust that they follow them. And let's be real, people aren't 100% reliable. So I definitely see it as a possibility. But
yeah.
But I mentioned earlier, we try to only really promote features and stuff on our platform that we think gives you really good data quality, and that's going to be a barrier for that kind of research, at least for the near future, right?
That's fair, because we've been using Zoom, and then we're using like another type of stimuli presenter, and like sharing screen. And then, so like we still have to see, like we have to validate data. Like this is going to be a thing in infant research to validate the data we're getting over Zoom, but we definitely are collecting it. But I'm thinking about too, like, I mean, we have like a adult comparison, and I've been using Qualtrics, and it makes me so sad because what I can do with Qualtrics makes it look very much like I don't know what I'm doing, because you can't do much with it. You just basically, I have to like put a little video that I put audio to, and I have to play it and then like kind of respond on a Likert scale. But it's like, just it feels so old school.
Well, Megan, maybe we should talk.
Yes.
We may be able to help you. I'm just saying.
Yeah. No, so here's a question. What's the learning curve like? Because it's, hard to learn a new way of doing things.
It is hard to learn a new way of doing things. Yeah, no, it's totally a hard thing to do. And I'm not going to pretend that there's no learning curve to trying to build a study on FindingFive. But what we do is, so let's say you wanted to do an online study on your own through Amazon Web Services and use Mechanical Turk, which was a very common thing for people to do not that long ago. You could build an entire study that way, but you had to know JavaScript. And JavaScript is an entire programming language. That is a big ask for a researcher to learn that just in order to make their research they've already thought and worked on so hard a tangible reality. So our attitude towards that was, we're moving away from that as researchers are beginning to move away from Mechanical Turk. But this was a starting point, and it's a worthy one to talk about, which was, well, we can handle the JavaScript. Why don't we provide a easier language for you to interface with, where it's not really a programming language. It's something in between a programming language and the language that you as a researcher use to talk about your study, right? We wanted to make it so that if you were to just try to tell me like, yeah, so I built this study. It has, 3 randomized blocks. And, in block 1, you're doing, you have the following kinds of trials. And then in block 2, you have these other type of trials. We tried to use that language. So we have, words like stimulus, response, trial, block. These are the terms that we use to allow you to build your study in what we call our study specification grammar, which is our special little language for this. And so wherever possible, we try to use terms that are already familiar to the researchers to limit that learning curve. There's not zero learning curve, right? Because at the end of the day, the way that you're specifying that study design is through an interface that involves some amount of typing in the thing. And so, there are ways to say, forget to put in a quotation mark where you needed it, or forget a comma where you needed it. And to the best that we can, we try to track those errors down and say, hey, you might have messed up here. So there is a learning curve. And then there's going to be places where different fields talk about the same thing in different ways. And we have to pick one way to talk about it for our grammar. So, maybe in social psychology, they use a certain term for a certain type of stimulus and response data collection paradigm. And in, linguistics, we may use a different one, but they're fundamentally the same. Well, we've coded up one way to do that, and it has one name. So you'll have to learn the name that we use if it's not the one you're comfortable with. But all of this stuff, we have a pretty extensive documentation. We're actively actually working to migrate our documentation to an even better format that makes it easier for us to keep it up to date and as clear as possible. So yeah, it's not a zero learning curve, but it really depends. If you've done any kind of programming at all in your past, I think it's a pretty shallow one, relatively speaking. If you've done none, yes, it's gonna be there, but it's a lot more manageable than I think any of the alternatives that I know of that are free, right?
Right.
Because it's in, we charge researchers for actually collecting data from participants because, it costs us money to host these servers for you. It costs us money to even just process a payment to a participant. So we do, try to collect this money from the researchers to cover those costs. But outside of that, I mean, you can join the platform for free. You can build and work on building a study for free. You can get help from us in implementing your design for free. Really, the only thing you have to pay for is, okay, it's time for me to literally collect data from participants. And that's the moment where you have to begin to pay. So you can get pretty far as a researcher playing with the platform, figuring out if it's right for you before you have to actually make the decision to spend any money.
Well, that's great. That's pretty helpful.
But as I mentioned, I mean, everyone on this project is a volunteer. So we have, our overhead is entirely the infrastructure needed to make these studies a reality and nothing else. So that's very helpful. It makes it a lot easier for us to charge. I don't like to brag, except I'm going to. We charge a lot less than any of the competitors that I know of, right? There are a lot of places that charge per participant, and our rates are often like 50% less, sometimes a little more less than that, sometimes a little less than that. Wow, that was
Linguists know how to talk.
Yes.
Yep, we do to speak good.
And most of your competitors are not nonprofits. They are a for-profit. Are they not?
Exactly
okay.
Right. And that's why they have to charge more, right?
Right.
I mean, they need to make a profit or their stock's going to plummet, right? We don't have to worry about that right now. I mean, we definitely thought about going profit for a window of time because we're like, well, if we do that, we can get investors and that could be good overall. But at the end of the day, you just, investors want things from you. And what they want from you isn't always in line with what you're trying to achieve, right? It's not necessarily what's best for the researchers or the participants. So we just decided it wasn't for us, at least for now. Who knows?
We get it, right, Carrie?
No, totally. 100%. Yeah.
I mean, we're careful not to, we don't want just like any old person like sponsor or ads on our thing that are like, I don't know.
Problematic.
Yeah.
Right.
So what you're saying is I'm special because
exactly.
We paid to be here. So
yeah. No, but we vetted you.
Yeah.
And talk to the whole, well, not the whole team, but a lot of the team,
well,
right?
the whole board, the board of trustees, it's the three of us that are the ones who decide what we're going to do.
Right.
Yeah.
That's who you talk to.
Right.
And actually to, back up a little, you mentioned the impact that COVID has had on the demands for this. I mean, when we started, that was not even close to on our radar. And I remember Ting, our founder, telling me one time privately, like I feel really bad that we're benefiting from this, right? Because at the end of the day, we were taking on a lot of new users and really expanding and growing because something horrible was happening in the world. And, we were talking about it and I was like, I don't think we need to feel bad as long as we stick to the mission of just like our goal is to make life easier for you.
Right.
And if more people are finding it easier, using our platform than not, then that just means we're doing a good job. Like, I don't think we need to feel bad about it. But
no.
Yeah. And you're also not making tons of money. So.
Well, personally, none of us are making any money. So.
Right. But even the company as a whole, it's not making tons of money. It's just making a little bit to keep the doors open.
Yeah. And obviously enough for us to sponsor programs that we believe in. So you're one of the, elite crew of two podcasts, I think, that we could afford to sponsor.
That's actually pretty amazing.
Yeah, that is. And we do have a lot of faculty and professors and people who do research listen and
grad students
podcasts. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I mean, I would hope, selfishly, but also just kind of because they clearly are the kind of people who are curious about this stuff. I would hope there are some listeners who would consider participating in research because, obviously we we can't learn from the world without people participating in these research studies, right? That's the most important part of any of it. And also, we know, the three of us, that the research that you're doing in the pre-online research era, your population of people you're pulling from can be very limited, right?
Yes.
A lot of times it's just
weird.
Who is attending this university, right? And even then, you sometimes still get bias, like where that, I don't know, white kid is more likely to participate in the study than anyone else. So, and I'm not saying that those kinds of things go away when you do your research online. It's still there. It's still something to be concerned about as a researcher. Is my data representative of the population, or is it representative of people who go online to do studies, right? But I think it's better than what we were getting in the university. And that's part of why we have this mission. Psychology has been acknowledging this for a while. Linguistics, I don't know if we're really acknowledging it fully yet, but we have replication problems where we have studies that we can't repeat and get the same result. And that means that the study wasn't as good as we thought. And one of the reasons for that is because the populations that a lot of these studies have been done with are so homogenous. And it's just, that's not reflective of reality.
No, think about the infants that would come to the lab. You have to have parents or caregivers that are able to come during the day, during a week. What kind of privilege do they have that allows them to do that? Yeah, Carrie said weird. So the weird population, it's acronym. So Western, Educated, Industrial, Rich, Democratic. This is where these people, we have a sampling bias. And one of the first things you learn about research is you need to have a random sample. Nothing's random. That is very much a utopic idea.
And also it's even worse than that because the age range tends to be 18 to 24-ish. So it's you're also just capturing this time of life that's not super representative of people's lives.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And the prefrontal cortex isn't even fully developed. So how does that affect it?
Yeah.
Good
Come
point.
on.
Just a little. It's gonna affect it a little.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Point. Yeah.
Now you just gave me an idea, because I was about to say one thing that we're actually just now launching is, because like I said, we're trying to expand and take more interest in the participant side of our business now. But the one of the things that we just are releasing, I don't know, either just released or are about to very soon, is demographic information for participants, so that a researcher can say, for example, I don't want 18 to 24-year-olds. Give me 30 to 50-year-olds for this study. Or even do something for this group, I want, 20 to 30-year-olds. And for this group, I want 30 to 40-year-olds. And for that one, I want 40 to 50-year-olds, because I actually care about the effects of age in this study, because guess what? It probably matters. So that's that kind of stuff. So, age information, which is bizarrely in other programs that I'm aware of, that other platforms that let you do this stuff, you specify the birth dates for the participants you want to recruit, which to me is crazy. So we just have you input an age, and we calculate the birth date for you.
Right.
Because why should you need to do that? And then that way, if someone, because the birth date that's going to give you 20 to 30-year-olds is going to change over the course of a month that you're running your study and gathering data. So we can also roll that date along, so that if someone's birthday happens to fall in the middle of that month, they better have joined on the right side of that birthday to fit into your data pool. We've also got things that we're putting in there, and this is self-report by the participant, by the way, they fill this in themselves, but gender information, for which we have a great number of categories to try to capture different possibilities. Language background, right now it's a pretty limited set of demographics that we can use, because we picked, okay, what are the things that we know people are going to, researchers on our platform are going to care about for the studies, based on the researcher population that we're familiar with, right? Which, let's be fair, are just the more vocal ones using our platform. Right. So we started kind of bare bones. Let's start there, make sure it's working, make sure it's good. And we are hoping to continue to expand it beyond there I think so. I think we have, language background, age, and gender. And then I think sexual orientation is another one that we have in there. And I kind of feel like I'm forgetting one, but that gives you a sense of the kind of stuff. And then since it's all self-report, a person can choose to fill in some of that or none of it in their profile. And of course, if you don't fill it in, then a researcher who's specifically looking for, I don't know, LGBTQ plus, someone who's in the age range of 40 to 60, and you haven't reported your age or your gender or your sexual orientation, any of these kinds of things, you won't be eligible for that study in that case. But we also try to, we try to toe the line. So we make it so that if a participant is looking for a study, they might get an opportunity to be told, hey, there are studies out there that you could be eligible for if you wanted to fill in more of your profile. Because, on the one hand, we want them to know that there's opportunities for them, but on the other hand, we don't want them to feel pressured to give information they don't want to give. So,
absolutely. I love this because I've been thinking about, psychology and cognitive science, just this world that you and I are familiar with, Noah, certainly. The research is obsessed with generalizing to the point where if you look at studies, sometimes they don't report demographic information. Again, if you're 20, someone who's, queer and they're 20 versus 60 are going to have very different experiences depending on what you're looking at. So you want to look at the difference, right? So the fact that psychology has a problem with trying to generalize when we mostly have this sampling bias, it's like we don't really know what we could possibly know. So it adds to the value of our science by being able to open up and look at specific demographics.
Right. And you're never going to be able to do that if you don't, have tools at your disposal for it. Right. And one of those tools is very simple. I mean, if you're recruiting participants in a lab, you can just ask them to report it. That's straightforward. But trying to do it in this more anonymous context, you have to have a tool. And so that's what we're trying to do right now. And we hope that people find it useful so that we can continue to expand it, because it's just impossible for us to predict all the things that could matter and all the things that a researcher might care about, which is already going to be, more limited than a number of things that are actually affecting the data, right? I mean, we're only human. We can only think of so many variables. But
Right. It's not even about comparison. It's just about being descriptive, knowing what these populations are doing.
Yeah. And I mean, to be really fair to, researchers and research in general, that can be a difficult thing to do, because the more you, not the best choice of word, but the more you segregate the populations of, that you're working with into these smaller and smaller categories, which is probably a fair thing to do. I mean, they probably have differences across these different categories, but the more you do that, the smaller the set in any given group you're going to have. And then you just don't have enough data to learn anything meaningful. At a certain point, you're just saying, how is, Tim different from Sally, right? So one of the reasons why I think it's important for platforms like us is because it's just a little easier to get more people if you're recruiting online, right? And so it just gives you a little more freedom to open up the doors so that you have enough participants that maybe hopefully you can fill out these tiny little groups a little more, at least enough to get some meaningful data, right? That shows trends that are about that population and not about the specific people you happen to recruit.
Definitely. Carrie, I'm thinking about too with semantics. Can you imagine using something like this?
Oh yeah, sure. Nothing that I would have done personally.
But as a semanticist, what could a semanticist do with this stimulus response or kind of online platform?
We'd probably want to have some kind of storyboard or some kind of visual and say are you which preposition would you use in this instance, or I don't know. I could totally imagine semantic uses of this.
We have, I think, had some studies that researchers have done on our platform using storyboards, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, you basically have to use storyboards because you need so much context to do like real semantic, like when you're really getting into it, like the distinctions between certain things. You really need a lot of context, and so storyboards can really help with that.
Oh, can you present video?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can present audio, video, images. We have self-paced reading. I forgot to mention that one earlier. A lot of options.
So like you could even do like pragmatic stuff, because then you could do like present a scenario via video and like ask for what a person might say, or like I don't know, I don't do pragmatic research.
Yeah, so so one thing you could do, you could present a video, like a short clip, and then you could have that video followed up with some sort of prompt, like, hey, answer the question at the end of the video, or respond to the person, or whatever, depending on what kind of video or what kind of response you're looking for. You could have them type something, you could have them record themselves giving the answer. So especially if you're doing pragmatics, you'd probably want to hear their inflection. So you could absolutely have them do that. And another thing that we do that I've been really excited about, because a lot of it can be difficult to do in other programs, but I think it's not too difficult for us, is you could, for instance, have some sort of prompt and then have multiple videos, and the participant chooses which video goes with the prompt. Right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Same with the storyboard too. You could pick the one that makes the most sense, and given the sentence that you give them.
Yeah, exactly.
So it doesn't all have to be about calculating or doing a t-test at the end of it with the data. Like you can get some of this more.
I mean, we leave all that to the researcher, right?
Right. Yeah.
We collect the data, we give you the raw data, and you process it however makes sense. And sometimes that's going to be t-tests and f-tests and similar things like that. Other times, some researchers, and I think this is, for example, you were talking about similarities. This is a great way to look at similarities, is to do more Bayesian models of statistics, like, rather than, because, if you're trying to say is X not different than Y, it's a difficult thing to do in the traditional, like, is, p-value kind of null hypothesis testing. Whereas in a more Bayesian style framework, where you're actually just looking at, the patterns of the data, not in terms of does it or does it not pass some magical threshold of significance, but rather just how much do these populations of data overlap, and that kind of thing. That can be a more powerful tool for looking at similarities. So all of that stuff, totally up to the researcher, because we, at least as of now, don't have any like data processing involved in what we do, or statistical processing. That's going to be all on you, but that's the stuff that you learn how to do as a researcher, right?
Yeah, so should we give the promotional code? Is that what we should do?
Yeah. Oh yeah, we do. We have a promotional code. Cool. So for anyone listening, any one of your listeners who is a researcher, we have two different servers, I should mention, one for the US and one for the European Union. So if you have any listeners who happen to be in the EU, we host separate servers over there. It's partially for GDPR reasons. Also just because then the data, like, it works faster and better for those people. So we have two different promotional codes depending on which of those populations you're in. We should mention our website for the US server is www.findingfive.com. Anyone wanting to, in the US, any researcher who wants to, can get a complimentary 1-month pro subscription. So this comes with some sort of fancy pants features that we have, and 100 free participants. So this would be 100 participants within that 1-month cycle. And that'll use the promotional code FF-US-FRIES. And then likewise for the EU, we have an FF-EU-FRIES. And that's at eu.findingfive.com. So we have a separate URL if you're in the European Union. But if your computer's IP address is in Europe and you try to use the US one, we will ask you to confirm that you actually want to do that, because we're like, hey, did you know you're in Europe?
So what about people who are in Australia or New Zealand or Africa or whatever? Would the US one be the one they would use, or?
They could use either. I would probably just use the US one. Because it's easier to remember www. I think.
Yes, that is true.
Yeah.
And I mean, we have some researchers. I actually don't know if we have any in, like, I don't know, is Oceania the right term for Australia and the neighboring areas? But we do have some in Asia and South America. I don't know if we have any in Africa right now. But yeah, we do have people using the platform in those areas. So I believe they do use the US server mostly.
Okay.
Which, remember, is just a cloud, right?
Yeah, it's just a cloud up in the sky. And when it rains, your data might get leaked,
Yeah. And importantly, toy with it before, mess around with it before you put your code in, right?
Yeah, so I talked earlier about how everything's free up until you try to recruit participants. So I do not recommend wasting any of your free time until you're really ready to run participants. And that way you have a full month to gather whatever data you want to do and still have it be free.
Right.
Amazing.
And they use these codes until August 31st.
Yes, that sounds right. I'll trust you.
That's what it says.
At midnight Eastern Standard Time.
Which is probably
Right on.
It's probably Eastern Daylight Savings time.
Right. Oh, yeah. Damn it.
It's not your fault. It says EST.
It's not your fault. No, that's our fault. That says EST for sure.
Yeah.
This is just a pet peeve of mine, because once I moved to Arizona, it really mattered whether it was standard or not.
No, I know.
Yeah.
Well, it was fun talking to you, Noah.
Yeah, that was really fun. I learned a lot.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And don't be an asshole, everyone. In your research, just do the best you can.
That's all we can do.
Exactly.
That's all we can do.
The Vocal Fries podcast is produced by me, Carrie Gillen, for Halftone Audio. Theme music by Nick Granum. You can find us on Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at VocalFriesPod. You can email us at vocalfriespod@gmail.com, and our website is vocalfriespod.com.